Thank you, Ms. Underwood. We'll now recognize Ms. Hinson.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Thank you, Acting Director Johnson, for coming before our committee again. It's great to see you, and thank you to the men and women who serve in your agency. I know it's not easy work, and I appreciate your service and theirs. One of my top concerns with the crisis we're seeing at our southern border is that we know that individuals on the terror watch list, sex offenders, some of these transnational gang members, drug traffickers, human traffickers, the list goes on and on of the bad people with violent criminal histories that we are seeing come into our country. They've exploited that weakness at our southern border, and even the Chinese Communist Party is taking advantage of it too. So my question to you is, are there times of year when ICE experiences increases in the number of investigations or removals of these types of criminals specifically, or surges, or times where you see more criminals that then you are having to deploy agents into the homeland to focus on those removals?
So, at least from an HSI perspective, it's always critically important that they focus on these individuals that pose a national security threat. So we have a cadre of seasoned agents who do nothing but work those types of cases. You know, oftentimes their focus is on the criminal aspect of it. You know, the removal and sort of administrative piece is sort of secondary. And, you know, once these individuals are finished their sentences, they would be referred to ERO or put in removal proceedings for removal. With the flow along the southwest border, we have been focusing on, you know, some of the unusual populations, folks that typically we don't typically see coming across, and just making sure that we have a good response to them, and designating some number of detention beds for those individuals as well.
Right, and obviously we've seen that number significantly increase. How are you communicating with our state and local tribal territorial law enforcement on these issues, especially in maybe rural communities like mine? Because obviously, you know, you talked a lot about the flows into some of the more populated areas, but it is an impact in states like mine as well. And the last thing we want is to see criminals, you know, come into places like this because maybe they're thinking it'll be less enforced. So what are you doing to communicate with those levels of law enforcement?
So in areas where we have great cooperation, I mean, obviously Iowa is one of them. We have really great relationships with our state and local partners. We do have challenges in other areas where folks aren't as cooperative, and we'll just have to continue to work with them to find some middle ground. But our relationships with our state and local partners are the bread and butter of our success. And, you know, whether they're participating in some of our task forces or on our best teams, you know, those relationships are critical, especially in smaller areas where it's just a small law enforcement community. Generally, everybody needs to just band together. So it's certainly important. We're always out sort of working with our state and locals and trying to make sure we have each other's back.
Yeah. Well, if there are jurisdictions that are creating challenges for you in executing your mission, please let me know. I'd love to work with you on making sure that they are following through, because ultimately this is a safety and security issue, not only for Iowans, but for all Americans. So I want to make sure that you have the cooperation necessary to do your job. I want to move quickly to the contingency fund conversation. You got assurances, obviously, that even with the reduction of $560 million to your budget, that those detention beds would be available from the contingency fund. If you're at certain levels, what levels were those exactly?
I can't remember the thresholds. I just know that they were really low, and that we have been at that threshold for the better part of, you know, the last 5
So you would
years.
meet those levels
So,
for sure.
I mean, I made my biggest concern is on October 1, I was going to need those funds.
Right.
And when we looked at the thresholds, we weren't going to have to wait 90 days. The funds would be available. So I am confident that we would not be required to take beds offline before we brought them back on.
So let me pose this question to you. What happens, though, if that fund has been depleted? Does that mean that you would not have the necessary resources to expand the beds you need?
It would be hard to deplete the funds, you know, 2 weeks into the new fiscal year, as I understand it. I mean, look, there's a lot of details that have to be worked out with this contingency fund. It's the first time we've ever done anything like this. I think it's a good concept because we do need a way to, get access to additional money when the border is seeing unusually high levels. In my personal view, I wish the 34,000 beds would have been in my base, and then I would have been able to gain access to, 5 or 10,000 beds as part of the contingency fund, but it didn't shake out that way.
Well, I think that taking funding away from your baseline budget and putting it into contingency slush fund that could be used for other services is reckless when you need those funds to actually execute on your mission. So I see this as a budget gimmick, and I think that we should be prioritizing getting you those funds directly. Thank you. I yield back, Mr. Chair.